going to be talking from a writing perspective in this video. I know people would have loved to see a death battle video between Brandon Stark and Tom Wambsgans, but unfortunately I'm boring, so that won't be the case today. There are most likely 100,000 videos covering why Game of Thrones Season 7 and 8 suck, and I definitely could go on a long-winded rant myself of every up they've done, but I'm just going to focus my sights on Bran Stark for right now. There are only 2 reasons why Bran Stark was a terrible choice to be the king. When you think of Bran being king, remove every other option for a moment and just think of Bran. It's honestly not a bad pick. An all-seeing demigod with gifts of premonition and the clear-headed wisdom of 1,000 wise men, yeah, that would be a really good king. But David Benioff and David Wise, or their nickname D&D, wanted to make sure that they didn't scare off football players with Game of Thrones magic scaling, so he's basically a wooden boy who wargs into birds sometimes and gives a little drop of half-baked dialogue where he's supposed to come across as wise. I can't speak for everyone, so I'm not going to. I can say, at least for myself, that if they wanted Bran to come across as a cosmically intelligent man or at least likable, I would have really loved this own version. I know it's lame to make the solution a fanfiction, but bear with me for a second. I was watching Young Justice, which I would say is not good throughout its entire run. It has interesting moments, but it's definitely mid sometimes. But there's a scene with Cyborg getting consumed by, I guess, a cybernetic parasite called a mother box. So Superboy is like, oh dang, can't let that happen. So he tracks down a god from a planet called New Genesis. He tells him what's happening to this guy and the god decides to come along. They go back to the hospital and Superboy is looking at this guy like, hey, are you gonna fix him now or what? And the god is like, nah man, I've never seen this before. I'm just gonna let it ride, you know what I mean? And I actually found that to be really cool. It's not some mustache twirling god being like, fuck you, because I'm a freaking psycho. It feels like a person at a genuine higher plane of existence, essentially watching an ant die. It's cold-hearted, but it's understandable from his perspective. I would have loved to see Bran kind of be like that. If they wanted to make him likable, then yeah, make him be really wise and considerate towards everyone he talks to. But give him an interesting flaw. It's like when Tyrion in Season 2 became Hand of the King, he was going around sentencing people and just feeling like the top dog. What he was doing wasn't necessarily bad, but it was definitely a case of being drunk with power. See how it can be seen as a flaw, but still the right thing to do? That would have been really cool to do with Bran. All these deluded characters around him coming to him, begging for their fate to be told on how they're gonna die, and Bran denies them that knowledge. Just thinking something like, why would I tell you your fate? You're so corroded with pride or lust or an intense desire for power, you would just want to know how you die so you can try and prevent it. I'm not going to tell you shit, playboy. That exact sentence would be nice. Making him a considerate character but unwilling to share his knowledge towards characters would have been a lot more interesting than wooden dialogue and wooden acting. No offense. It's not like he had a lot to work with anyway. I just get this intense feeling that D&D just didn't think hard enough with Bran. They described being the three-eyed raven as this OP entity, but in the end, they just didn't want Bran to be a meta character to the plot, so they just stuck him in the corner like their grandma in the nursing home.
Not a nursing home. How many times do I gotta say this? It's a retirement community.
Okay, so we locked in on Bran so we can open up our scope a little bit. Him being chosen as king created a huge uproar from the audience for multiple reasons, but I only consider 2 to be real arguments to why Bran should not have been king. Number 1, he's boring. Number 2, the canon. I'm not going to fixate on what it should have been for this section, even if I disagree with these 2 fucking bozos. I'm going to be speaking about their ironclad creative choices and try to guess why they made the choices they made. When you look at the whole cast of characters around him, you honestly can't help but forget about Bran, because he's not interesting. He became an afterthought, a fucking fart in a different room. Obviously, everyone wanted Jon Snow to become king because he's cool, righteous, and humble, but I was never mad at Jon Snow not wanting or becoming king. After 4 really good seasons of what it is like to be king, it fucking sucks.
Backstabbing and scheming and arse-licking and money-grubbing. Sometimes I don't know what holds it together.
Our marriage.
Besides that, the people you interact with are snakes. You have to constantly watch your back while you're the king. I feel like in the earlier seasons, the only good aspect of that position is the title and the power. That's 100% the points that good boy George was trying to make. That's what everyone is truly hunting for in the show. It could be some self-deluding idea that you'll bring an age of peace, but deep down, it's just to say, I'm the fucking boss. So with Jon Snow denying the crown, I really don't think it would have suited him anyway. Sansa might have been good, but obviously she wants nothing to do with King's Landing anymore and wants to rule Winterfell the right way by separating the realm as its own independent state, which I actually thought was a fine decision to do from D&D. I could see a world where Genji Baratheon gets it. He seems like he actually understands the common man, and the 5 scenes with him in season 7 and 8 weren't terrible, but I don't think he's friends with too many people to be recognized with those traits. The strongest case for him might be his birthright, but they absolve that way of the election from their government anyway. Do you see the problem right now? I've pulled up a few examples of some fine candidates and explained how D&D have written them and why they do not work based on their character and or principles. So, tell me why they have Bran say,
I can never be Lord of Winterfell. I can never be Lord of anything. I'm the three-eyed raven.
I don't know what that means.
And not only do D&D make him king, they make Bran be like, no shit man, I always came here to be king, bruh. I wouldn't be that mad at Bran being king, but they told us that he cannot be anything but the three-eyed raven. Either way, it looks terrible for D&D because it either says that they are terrible writers who don't take the characters' words and principles as fact, or they forgot. Hey guys, the little editor's note here. While doing research for this video, I found that someone said this quote of "I can never be Lord of anything" is trying to make a point that he's no longer Brandon Stark, he is now the three-eyed raven, which is all good and dandy. I would say 2 things to this. 1, if that was the intent of the dialogue / scene, that sucks. That is not how it comes across whatsoever. I don't know if the majority of people watching it just didn't pick up on that or what. To me, it feels like Brandon Stark is saying he cannot be anything but the three-eyed raven. And the second thing I'd say is that if that's the case, then how come when he became king, everyone was dubbing him King Bran the Broken? Is my little question for that. That's the problem with this series. It's especially season 7 and 8. It just has all this stuff that's kind of just up in the air, especially in the scene I just showcased. It feels like they were saying that Bran will be nothing but the three-eyed raven, no titles, no lordship, no nothing, but they didn't go more into depth with that. Instead, they did an exposition about what the three-eyed raven is. It still stands that Bran being king was a lazy move, and it still feels like they pulled a fast one on us for this. I don't know, to me nothing really changes from this fact, but just wanted to let that in. At the end of the day, they chose Bran because it defied expectations, but you know what's really great about defying expectations as a writing tool? If it's actually creatively hinted at slowly through the show / movie. Anyone who rewatches it can be like, there's a little hint there that they didn't see before, it's fun. But nah, Arya kills the Night King because of a prophecy that was obviously about Arya becoming an assassin. But D&D are like, we can make it work. See, if we get a character to dedicate an entire scene just to really explain things on how this makes sense, then people will understand it instead of just making sense. The writing decision to make Bran the Broken Stark the king was entirely based on defying expectations and the meta choice. That's really it. At the time of writing this, it's about 4 hours after watching the finale, so I can't really tell how people are taking the decision that Tom is the CEO. But honestly, I love it. There was a point in season 3 where I really thought about which Roy siblings should be CEO, and I thought none of them. Let's do this in reverse order and talk about the Roy siblings first. Connor Roy has had an interest in politics from a very young age. I think it was very obvious that he was not going to be CEO for a number of reasons. First off, he's a massive fence rider on purpose. He's never really seemed to care that much about the business, and as Willis said, he kinda doesn't do anything. So when he decides to try and get his father's approval, it's not something genuine or small. He decides he wants to be the president of the United States. And what can be said about all the Roy children, but specifically Connor, is that he has no real touch in reality. He really has nothing and no one to ground himself with. He complains that Uncle Sam is fisting its citizens, but he is part of one of the wealthiest families in the world. But most importantly, he never played the game.
I'm a GIF now. One of the con heads sent it in. I'm a meme.
You're a meme?
Yeah.
Out of all of the Roy siblings, I always thought Kendall would make the best CEO personally. Big Kendall guy right here. He has actual experience in the business. He worked within Waystar Royco for a number of years and actually steps up with his plans. He's the only one out of all the Roy children to try and step up to his father and honestly tell him what he thinks. But, and it's a big but, his ego is just off the fucking charts. Plastic Jesus thinks he's gonna save the world by becoming a boss of a company. From the series finale, we hear a quick story that honestly gave a decent look into why Kendall is this way.
He fucking promised it to me. Promised. When I was 7. He sat me down at the Candy Kitchen in Bridgehampton, and he fucking promised it to me.
That was messed up. Like, he shouldn't have done that.
No. He shouldn't have said that.
And it obviously impacted him because he still remembers it as an important moment for him. And I think that moment for Kid Kendall made him believe that he was meant to do great things and be the heir and all that hoopla. He believed for so many years growing up that everything around him will be his. So of course he's gonna act like a spoiled rich kid when mommy Shiv doesn't give him the vote. Deep down, Kendall was really grounded with the little work of the company, expansions, cutting what's necessary, the nitty gritty of the actual business. But when it comes to the bigger picture, he flies way too close to the sun every time. Because of that, he lost the game. Roman is a conflicting one because he can easily be one of the most annoying and plain out mean-spirited characters when it comes to talking shit. I suppose you can call him the most innocent one, quote unquote, with his childlike responses to things, but he's also the most brutal one. It seems like he was the only one of the Roy children who was abused, and it definitely had a massive effect on him. He can't recall a single good memory with his dad, which means that all he got as a kid was just ridicule and physical harm, which has now twisted his view on love immensely. Paying his love to Roman. He's a massive masochist. We see that most clearly in his romantic interests. So when it comes to him trying to be the CEO, in hindsight, Roman doesn't want to be. I think he honestly just wanted to spend time with his dad, the man who doesn't hold back on calling him names and belittling him.
Roman, you're a moron.
So not only is he gunning for CEO for the belittling from his father, but also to try and get his dad to be proud of him. Anytime he does something remotely useful, he's shocked that he succeeded. There's a big part of him that doesn't seem interested in being the boss because his self-esteem is so low. But his competitive nature to win his dad's approval keeps him in the race. The biggest crutch to Roman is that he hates anything real. He shoves literally everything real down and deludes himself that everything will be okay as he projects his inner torment onto everyone he deems below him. That came back to him during the funeral for sure. That moment was arguably the most honest moment from Roman, but that honesty proved to everyone in the room he wasn't cut out being the boss. After realizing he quote-unquote fucked it, he decided that he wants out of the race. So he lost the game. Shiv is also a conflicting one because I really do think she's the smartest Roy, but that's 100% her own downfall. Even though she was an active member of the family growing up, there was always this pocket of air between herself and the CE bros. So in order to cope with being a forced outsider, she tells herself she doesn't want anything to do with it, when in fact that's all she's ever wanted. So with her playing outside of the war room, she became an analyzer and wildly devious, always making sure she's getting the better end of that stick. But like I said, that is her downfall. She's self-aware enough to realize how smart she is, but her ego pumps herself up way too much to think that she's way smarter than everyone else, and it always bites her in the ass. The biggest reason why she should not be CEO, in my opinion, is that she has literally no experience inside the company. She may understand the surface level aspects of the job, but she has no idea what the actual work is. She only wants the title and the title alone, and to spit on her brothers out of some spiteful way to prove that she's better, which is why I think she backed out of the Gojo deal. She doesn't think Kendall would be good at it, not because of any actual reasoning. It's because she fucking despises that Kendall is getting it and not her. She realizes that she is agreeing to a deal where she is getting nothing that interests her. Kendall promises her ATN, but really, she doesn't give a flying fuck about ATN. She doesn't care about the work. She cares about the title. She lost the game, so she made everyone lose the game. Now that we did a brief summary of each of the Roy children, here's what Tom is. Whether you like it or not, Tom is a person that was continuously beaten down, put his neck on the line for the company, will degrade himself to any extent for his own self-gain, and actually understands the work. I know my actually understands the work mentions before are lame and such a fun to watch show, but it really does convince me on how certain people should or should not get the job. Tom was in a totally loveless relationship with Shiv, and no matter what people say, I really do think Tom loved Shiv. I think he saw a lot of perks in marrying a woman like Shiv for sure, but he mainly did it because he actually loves her. Tom ate a lot of shit while climbing up the ladder. He did everything he was asked of him, no matter how morally wrong it was. He even volunteered himself to go to prison, which rattled his mind with fear in almost every scene he was in for a while. If we're going to talk about this story like it's kings and princes with heirs and birthrights and blah 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 blah, Tom is 100% a knight with a voice that sounds like he's swallowing blubber off screen. The writers choosing Tom is honestly the best decision they could have made. No one really expected Tom too much because, like I said before, he was such a sad servant that barely stood up for himself. He wasn't Greg levels of getting the punching bag treatment, but he wasn't far off from it either. In the first episode, Logan says when speaking about Greg joining the company,
"You think Tom can handle the competition?"
insinuating that Logan honestly saw Tom, a man about to become the head of ATN, on the same playing field as a 20-something who can barely go through a sentence without stuttering or saying a word that he definitely doesn't know the meaning of. It is a defying of expectations, but it's written really well and makes a lot of sense. We saw every other legitimate player try to prove themselves as the one to be CEO, and in their attempts we saw every reason to why they shouldn't be. It's crazy to say that the only bad things that Tom did was attempt to cover up a murder-rape case in cruises, lie to Congress, and use a man as a stool. Because if we point the spotlight at any of these other goobers, it really does make Tom look the best. I especially want to say, Tom may be the best out of the worst picks, but the only reason why he was hired is simply because he doesn't mind having shit for dinner. Lucas Madsen has stated that he was going to be trimming the fat out of Waystar Royco the same way as a clunker is to be treated at a body shop. So in his mind, he doesn't care who the CEO is, as long as they do what he says. So having that test dinner with Tom where Madsen mentions that he might fuck his wife, and all Tom does is just go, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine." That proved to Madsen that he is the perfect pick. If Greg is considered the highest paid assistant in history, then Tom is 100% the highest paid servant in history. He won the game. The differences in writing for the who becomes the king moment for both of these shows really demonstrate where the writers think the most logical, at least attempting to be satisfying, defying of expectations should land. D&D making Bran become king somehow felt like cheating, with Bran himself admitting that he cannot become anything but the Three-Eyed Raven, with all this hype that being the Three-Eyed Raven is one of the most powerful beings in the world but ends up being barely a person. It's that feeling in a Marvel movie where in a character's standalone movie they're incredibly OP, but in later editions the writers have to nerf the fuck out of them just so that they're not more powerful than other heroes or the main villain. It just feels like they lied and cheated about everything with Bran. That is why that moment isn't remembered happily for most fans. With Tom, everything felt earned, and almost all the characters are shown to be big pieces of shit. The moral compass in Succession is one of the most complex compasses I've seen. Game of Thrones used to have a similar vibe with its moral grayness, but it became good versus bad very quickly. Anytime I show Succession to a friend of mine and they realize by episode 4 that they hate pretty much everyone on the roster, I tell them, this isn't a show where you have a favorite and a least favorite. This is a pick your favorite kind of cancer show. This is a show where you go hating this character one episode, then the next episode you pity the fuck out of them, and realize that these are all broken, miserable, and petty people with their own self-gain in mind at all times. It's a fight in the mud. No matter how most people feel about Tom becoming CEO, they will never be as mad as how most people feel about Bran simply because they wrote it to make sense.